going to welcome you to CGSR's continuing series of presentations by distinguished external speakers. Today we have a very distinguished speaker, but I'm going to hand his introduction over to our South Asia expert, Zach.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out on Monday morning here out in Elvok. We're fortunate to have Vice Admiral Vijay Shankar, who is here in the United States on a lecture tour, and we were able to persuade him to make a stopover here and talk to us about a topic of very high interest to this group and to all of us. I'm trying to decide whether I introduce you as a fellow windsurfer and sailor and kindred spirit. As is sometimes the case, Admiral Shankar is also a friend of mine. But he is one of our top experts on India's nuclear doctrine, and his talk has the intriguing title of A Covenant Sans Sword. So we will look forward to being enlightened. But the challenges to India's nuclear doctrine, we certainly understand. Those of us who are familiar with India's nuclear doctrine understand that it is in a time of change. And we are looking to Admiral Shankar to give us a sense of what the changes in nuclear doctrine might entail. Is deterrence in South Asia stable and in a healthy condition, or is there something that needs to be adjusted to ensure the stability of nuclear deterrence? And what about China and the China factor? And does India's nuclear posture and nuclear doctrine require adjustment for the complexities of this India, China, Pakistan triad? Speaking of triads, India has also developed the capability to field a nuclear triad that includes nuclear-armed submarines, and that's a topic of special interest, and we will look to Admiral Shankar to enlighten us a little bit about the maritime dimension. Admiral Shankar is the former commander and flag officer of the Western Fleet. He is a fellow at the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies in New Delhi, and a fellow with the United Services Institute. These are the kind of premier level think tanks in India that look at these kinds of issues. He's also the former commander of the Strategic Forces Command in India, so he speaks with quite a lot of background authority and insight. He has advanced degrees from the Naval Command College, the Defense Staff College, and the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. So with that, I would like to welcome our speaker, Vice Admiral Vijay Shankar.
Bruce, Zach, thank you very much for those words of introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you, and I'm deeply sensitive to the fact that I stand on very hallowed ground. I mean, this was the laboratory that gave its name to a chemical element, livermorium, and that's big. I mean, I don't know who gave the name to thorium, but there you are. You've got an element behind you. You've also got a series of weapon designs that went into enabling the American nuclear doctrine. And these designs were, as it were, ranged from the tactical to the megatonnage strategic weapons. They were made for being carried on vectors that ranged from the submarine to the land-based missiles to the airborne vehicle. And therefore, as I said, I am deeply sensitive to this fact. I'm deeply sensitive of the fact that many of you have lived a lifetime in this business of designing weapons. I'm also deeply sensitive to the fact that I'm unlikely to be invited to Los Alamos, since I understand there's a long-standing competition that's been going on between these two labs. That be as it may, it's a pleasure to be here amongst you this morning. As a prologue to my talk, which is called A Covenant Sans Sword, I have actually mentioned what I'm going to speak about. That is, in declaring her nuclear doctrine and operationalizing the deterrent, India pledged voluntary renunciation of the first use of nuclear weapons. On the face of it, such a disavowal defies conventional wisdom. To deliberately temper a sword and then to abjure its first use would appear to contradict sovereign morality. And this sovereign morality is an issue that I'm sure many of you have discussed, those of you who've been in the business. But I've had the chance to discuss this with our previous nuclear command authority, Mr. Manmohan Singh, and I distinctly put this question to him, that how is it that you're going to bear responsibility for a first strike coming onto India, and some poor Joe Sucker in Jumri Talaya or something that loses all he has along with another 150,000 people. He said, he didn't think too much to reply. He said that, Vijay, how do you think I'd feel that if I set off a chain of events that resulted in a similar catastrophe? So morally, I find the former far more, should we say, intense, far more catastrophic than the latter, because we can take steps to ensure that it does not happen. That was his very sage statement. How he intended to do that was what I was supposed to implement. That as the strategic forces commander, it was my job to operationalize a deterrent that would, in fact, make sure that the first shot would not be fired from any side. This is a problem that we'll come to, particularly when dealing with an extremely rough neighborhood that India is in. Right. Now, the title of my address, Covenant Sans Sword, is actually not a very original statement. It was borrowed from Hobbes, when Hobbes said that one of the imperatives of establishing a social contract, either with your own people or with the peoples of the globe, is that there must be an aura, an awe of visible power. To quote exactly what he said, and covenants without the sword are but words and are of no strength to secure a man at all, by which he meant society or a citizenry or a group of people. But the problem with nuclear weapons is that it's no ordinary sword, because the unprecedented destructive promise that it holds is of a nature that actually denies the very purpose of warfare. Warfare, conventional wisdom will tell you, is an extension of politics by other means. That's to quote Clausewitz. Now, if the purpose of those politics itself is going to be destroyed, then there's not very much point in waging that kind of a war of total annihilation, a war of destruction of purpose. And that really is the unprecedented promise of nuclear weapons. The second aspect about nuclear weapons is the unprecedented coercive influence and promise that it provides. Has history told us anything about this, that this coercive influence or its impact on a potential adversary has really had the kind of effect that you wanted? Well, history is perhaps still in a very nascent stage to make any such analysis. But we have noted that since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there's been no use of nuclear weapons. Since China, India, and Pakistan went nuclear, there has not been, while you may make a case for saying that things went to the edge, there was a certain amount of brinksmanship that occurred. But never was there an overt statement that the next step is going to be a nuclear weapon. So something has worked. Not to say that because something has worked over the previous decade and a half, it is likely to work in the future too, because of a variety of reasons, which we'll talk of. But most importantly is what you guys are dealing with on a daily basis, and that is technology. Because my view on technology is something like this. While technology intrusions invite covertness, its effect, its impact always demands more and more transparency. For a variety of reasons, precision has improved, the rapidity with which you can actually bring to bear these weapons has improved, the way and the ranges at which you can launch them is so vast, the control and the precision with which you can control has also made it quite infallible in the weapons use. And if you put it at sea, you also make it to a great extent invulnerable. Remember, those of you who may have some connection or a background of the Navy, you know the tropical waters, such as the waters that surround that are prevalent in the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and the Bay of Bengal, are of a nature where the probability of detection is extremely low, And if these waters are in areas that you actually can control, then you actually provided as close to an invulnerable situation as you can to a nuclear-based, a submarine-based deterrent. The last logic that nuclear weapons provide is the ability to deter conflict beyond the conventional. After all, while in the earlier parts of Clausewitz's book and most books, they talk about warfare as something that is aiming at total annihilation, we come to a situation where we talk about limited warfare that has limited aims, limited benefits, limited reasons for waging it, and if at all a threshold can be drawn, then that threshold actually demarcates conventional weapons from nuclear weapons. When India went nuclear, remember that India went nuclear not so very long ago, it was late 90s, 1998 to be exact. We had very, very few precedences to follow. There was very few other countries, 8 today, but 6 then, who had actually gone nuclear, and very few of them had actually come into the open as to how they evolved a nuclear theology or a nuclear policy for their nation. And one of the first documents that was studied was America's NSC Memorandum number 68 in conjunction with 20. 20 talked about how the Soviet Union was to be contained, but 68 posed an extremely important dilemma to the planners, and that dilemma remains that what are the determinants of the use of power in general and nuclear weapons in particular. This dilemma was also faced by planners in India, that what really are the determinants of the use of nuclear weapons. Are you going to use it as a conventional weapon? Are you going to send it down to the field? How are you going to control it? Is it a weapon that only the politician or the political leadership will control, or is it going to be some other form of control? We'll come to that in a minute. while the motivation for NSC 68 was fairly clear, there was a violent half a century that preceded the arrival of NSC 68, 2 world wars, 2 revolutions, collapse of 5 empires, degeneration of 2 imperial powers, pace of technology, global power distribution, and the clash of ideologies. I don't need to elaborate on these, but these are there to be counted and, in fact, studied. Because in 1950, or whenever this NSC 68, 52 or 50, NSC 68 actually was promulgated as a memorandum within the planning staff. The past was so recent, its effects were so recent. The new distribution of power, which had changed from the imperial and colonial forces countries to the Soviet Union and USA, was so new that it had to take into deep consideration as to what sort of weapons is going to ensure stability under these conditions. And then finally, and this was the interesting part of the memorandum, that the strategic logic was that low-level threats could invite a nuclear response. Now, when you say that low-level threats are going to invite a nuclear response, then where exactly is it leading to? When you're talking about 2 nuclear-armed adversaries, if you seriously believe that you can control the mechanics of escalation of the use of nuclear weapons, I'm afraid that wasn't going to work, at least not in the mind of Indian planners. Thank you very much. So now we look at the evolution of a nuclear theology for India, right? Because when we say that we have studied what has happened in the Cold War, we've studied the kind of brinkmanship that it involved, we have studied the fact of these huge arsenals that could bring about some, God knows, 800 years of nuclear winter by themselves for the Earth, in terms of the number of warheads that could be exchanged. And so certain foundational principles were made. The first was that this weapon is not a military weapon. This weapon is a political tool and would be under firm political control, and therefore India would not be the first to use these weapons. The second was that should we be under a nuclear first strike, then the retaliation would be of a nature that would be massive. It would not be any small-scale retaliation, because that was the essence of how a nuclear exchange was to be deterred. As I had mentioned earlier, there was no belief in the fact that you could control the mechanics of escalation. There was no belief in the fact that response, in fact, could be tailored for a particular opponent, particularly if you were adopting a no first use policy. The idea was to punish the adversary, or at least put a contingency in front of him where the punishment would be of such a nature that there'd be no gains of his action, which seemed to be logical to the Indian planners. The third aspect of our foundational principles was that deterrence was what you were targeting. Now, deterrence in itself, it will strike you, demands a certain rationality on the part of leadership. Rationality that the pain was to be far greater than the gains of the use of these kind of weapons, to try and put it into in very succinct terms. It had to be credible, and if it had to be credible, you must have the kind of weaponry that makes these weapons credible. There's no point in, there was a group in India that really felt that once you have demonstrated the potential of nuclear weapons in your hands, then what do you need an arsenal for? almost as if those, one or two turns of the screwdriver is something that we can call on at any stage. And as if a deterrent of this nature that is based on an intrinsic capability would actually deter warfare, and particularly nuclear warfare. And therefore, that particular, fortunately, that period in the evolution of our nuclear policy is long gone and over. A time had come where you had to make an explicit statement of the capability by demonstration and then to build an arsenal. The third part of the third bullet was that the arsenal would be minimal. We had noted pretty clearly that the way arsenals went as far as the two superpowers were concerned, it covered the entire gamut of nuclear weaponry. It went into the 35,000 warheads level, which, if you really look at it, is pretty odd to explain today as to why numbers had reached that stage, other than the fact that the building of an arsenal itself leads to a certain momentum that demands more. And whether that is the way to go, that the arsenal will continue to bulge as long as we believe we have the technologies to bulge it. That was something that was to be totally abhorred as far as the planners in India were concerned. Now, the very unique part of the Indian nuclear doctrine or the Indian nuclear policy or theology was that its agenda was driven by a techno-political bureaucratic nexus. What I wish to highlight is that the military is totally absent in that hyphenated phrase, techno-political bureaucratic nexus. Now, it led to it had a certain fallout on the way the arsenal developed, because the military was totally out of it. People who were groomed in the idea of using weapons, who were groomed in the idea of using destructive power, they were kept totally out of it, and therefore you found that at a time at which you were taking moonshots with rockets, you were developing short-ranged ballistic missiles. Really doesn't make sense, because the range does not conform to the kind of ideals you put before your doctrine. No first use, massive retaliation. What are you talking about short ranges? And therefore, you came out with certain weapons like the Prithvi 1, 2, and 3, which really had ranges varying from 150 kilometers to 350 kilometers, which was an aberration of the techno-political bureaucratic nexus. There was no military advice to say, listen, if you know first use, you better start developing ranges. In fact, I will share this with you. The Arihant, which is the seagoing element of the triad, was first being developed as an SSN, a nuclear submarine, a nuclear-powered submarine, not an SSBN. That comes a little later. And these were the aberrations that came about because of a techno-political bureaucratic nexus that actually sat at the helm when our nuclear policy was being evolved. But one of the plus points, one of the major pros of it was a clear understanding of separating conventional from nuclear weapons and controller from custodian. That is, while the military would be the custodian of the weapons and would be involved up to a point in the planning for its use, control of use would be with the politician, and also that there'd be a clear demarcation between the nuclear weapon and conventional weapons. For better or worse, that is what we adopted. It seems to have served us reasonably well. The fourth point, which was a foundational principle of it all, was that there was no recognition of the idea of proportionality of response or control of escalation. Now, this was an astute understanding, that once you use weapons of mass destruction, are you serious that the other person is now going to say, hey, 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 let's slow down up the escalatory ladder, especially with technology coming in, giving you the wherewithal to actually press an electronic key, and there you are, you poop off a few salvos of nuclear weapons, because you would be mortified by the fact that you would not be able to respond. And it's a very basic understanding in warfare. When you start using conventional ideas of warfare are governed by the principles of war. We will not go into them, but some of them are things like mobility, surprise, and things. You really want to surprise somebody with a megaton? I mean, is this in the realm of reality? Knowing full well that a 20 kiloton weapon in a densely populated city would, by all calculations, based on what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, would result in 150,000 primary casualties. And then there are secondary, and then there are tertiary. And therefore, do you really believe that there are methods by which you could actually control escalation? Planners in India felt that there was no way that you could control this escalation once the genie was out of the bottle, and therefore, if at all it had to be used, then that had to be in a massive manner. Because you didn't start it, you never wanted to start it. You have made clear that your entire arsenal is not for use, it is for avoidance. It is for avoiding a nuclear exchange. There was another new factor that had come in, which did not play a part in the development of arsenals in the Soviet Union and the USA, and that was a new factor, nuclear multilateralism. I mean, take it this way, if North Korea develops a weapon, which he probably has already, and tests it to new ranges, it's going to send tremors down the entire Pacific region. One may even consider releasing Japan from its obligations to treaties like the San Francisco Treaty, the Chicago Conference, and so on, Potsdam Conference, and so on and so forth. At the same time, if China were to develop a first strike capability, it would send a whole lot of signals to other countries and the kind of arsenals that they would develop, which is true of the impact on India itself. If China were to change its no first use policy, you can rest assured that there would be certain fine-tuning in India's policy too. Of course, if proliferation continues in the manner in which it is happening, Israel is getting a little nervous in the Middle East. And why is it getting nervous? Because the Pakistani Taliban has already raised out its hands and said, hey, IS is the way to go. And remember that these are the outfits that have made extremely clear that if nuclear retribution, or if massive destructive retribution is to be attempted, then your primary targets are America, Israel, and India. And this is the effect of nuclear multilateralism, and therefore, sensitive to the fact that any changes to your arsenal, any changes to your policy will have an impact on the general nuclear security environment. Nuclear multilateralism had to be considered, and therefore there had to be a certain consistency of policy. That was the bottom line of this of nuclear multilateralism as far as Indian planners were concerned. The last part was that the essence of deterrence lies in rationality. This is, I think, stating the obvious. The person being deterred, or the deterree, was convinced that the pain that he was going to be inflicted on him was far more than the gain. So he didn't go in that direction. The deterrer felt that my idea of creating this arsenal is to deter the exchange, and therefore I'm quite happy if a nuclear exchange is deterred. And the beauty of this relationship, however irrational or however, however, I don't want to say idiotic, however idiotic it may sound, was this, that the roles were reversible. One would deter the other. But the essence of it was there had to be rationality amongst leadership. Now, this is a very important issue. Remember, we will, of course, focus on Pakistan, but we've had leadership there, particularly their military leadership, who've come out with statements like, the General Aslam Beg, who was chief of the army staff in the early 90s, who actually went on record sometime in 2006 when he was interviewed by Reuters to state that this is about the time when there was a lot of talk going on that American special forces were gearing up to defang Pakistan by nullifying their entire nuclear arsenal. There was also talk that there was a joint American-Israeli operation being planned to take out Pakistan's arsenal. Now, Beg goes on record to say that we don't care. If that were to happen, then we would have at least 1 or 2 weapons, and those would be lobbed on India. I say, where did India come into this equation? And therefore, this business of rationality has to be looked at pretty closely. Also remember that in 2002, we had the Director General of the SPD, General Kidwai, who actually came out with in nuclear terms, a fairly rational, a stable statement. He actually defined 4 thresholds, which actually said when and under what conditions would Pakistan use nuclear weapons. That is, 1, substantial loss of geographic territory; 2, that there was economic strangulation of the economy; 3, that the very existence of the state due to subversion would bring about a breakdown of the innards of the state, which is happening anyway at the moment. Lastly, a political failure within the country. These are the thresholds caused by war, which he laid down, which, in a perverted sense, you could actually understand this. You could understand these thresholds. It made sense. But unfortunately, within 2 months, these thresholds and the statement itself was revoked, and today we are in a situation where there's been no declaratory policy that Pakistan has made, that what are the conditions of operationalizing and the conditions in which their nuclear weapons would be used, which is something. These weapons are not like conventional weapons, as I had mentioned earlier. And when the Nasser was first tried out, the Pakistan government actually released a statement to say this is a weapon, a nuclear weapon, that permits our forces to shoot and scoot. Where? Where are you going to scoot? Nuclear weapon, shoot and scoot. I mean, this is pretty absurd. And therefore, this last bullet I'd like you to look at with a certain element of, should we say, I would like you to balance out what is the condition on the ground and where rationality stands in the equation in the subcontinent. So, 2003, India declares a nuclear doctrine. I won't spend too much time on it. I'm sure it's well known, but in form, no first use was central to the doctrine. The arsenal that was to be built up was to be made credible. It had to be minimal. And at the end of it, there were certain philosophical goals. After all, Rajiv Gandhi in '82 itself had may have got the year wrong, but had stated that one of India's goals is nuclear disarmament as a utopian goal or an idealistic goal or an aspirational goal. But it was there that, listen, we don't want to use these weapons. Nobody wants these weapons. And if some means can be found, because just before I came here for this address, this point came up, that is aspirational, are aspirational goals, do they make any sense? And Bruce very sagely brought out, it's like the Pope telling you, thou shalt not sin. Thou shalt not sin. Thou shalt not sin. I mean, not a bad idea, but we sin, don't we? Similarly, an aspirational goal is there. It is, to me, as a lodestone giving you direction, it makes sense that we must head for that goal. You may never achieve it, but the fact is, hold it. This is not a weapon that needs to be used. Why? Because you have other methods of sorting out differences between nations. You have military methods, but certainly not total annihilation as a solution. Therefore, it makes a little sense to have a guiding star somewhere telling you which way to go. The second aspect of it was the substance of it. It covered all command and control aspects, which really meant that who was in charge here. In India's case, clearly, it is a nuclear command authority who is the Prime Minister. He is the only one who can authorize release of nuclear weapons. In the case of his, should we say, removal from the scene, well, there's redundancy there too. There is a alternate NCA. It is not his deputy. It's not his deputy in the cabinet of ministers. It is an alternate NCA who operates from a different command post and so on and so forth. So a great amount of redundancy is provided both at the command level and at the control level. There is no way that one man can release it. There is multiple agencies that have to be involved in opening gates, but only one person can authorize the release of nuclear weapons, and that clearly is the Prime Minister, nobody else. Arsenal stewardship, by which we mean all the aspects. I shouldn't be telling you this. I think you gentlemen are very clear as to what stewardship of our arsenal means and what it implies in terms of technological demands, in terms of periodicity of change, in terms of security to be provided to locations. And therefore, I marvel at the fact that we have a neighbor who actually says that, my nuclear weapons are in danger, I'm going to load them on any truck and generally keep shuffling them around. If you recall, there was this report that came about a few years ago. Can anyone really move nuclear weapons in ramshackle trucks without escorts? With the idea that the other guy will not notice this truck. Hey, you've got a problem internally. Those that are internal to you are fully aware as to what is happening. And if they were to switch sides to the bad guys, then this is the opportunity for you to lose your nuclear weapons, a full-fledged nuclear weapon with all the gubbins that go into being able to enable them. The doctrine clearly addressed targeting. Now, targeting is extremely important. While I am not at liberty, and anyway, I'm out of that game and have been out of it for a while now, targeting is something that has been, as far as our planners are concerned, we believe there has been very careful thought into actually saying what our response is going to be. Should we be subjected to a first strike? Is it going to be a value target? And if it is a value target, which value target are you going to hit first? Remember, unlike India we have about, I think at the last count there were more than 52 cities that have a population of more than 1 million. But in Pakistan, particularly, China's like us, they have about 108 cities that have a population more than 1 million. As far as Pakistan is concerned, it's just a handful. They're just a handful of value targets. So therefore, the targeting issue is not so, should we say, not so difficult to visualize and provide before the NCA. So the decision to fire comes down to just pushing a button by him. The decision to release a nuclear weapon and what sort of a weapon. And I need not tell you guys, some sort of a matrix is worked out, and targets to weapons and which weapons and so on and so forth. These things are pre-designated, and it is left within this little screen from where the NCA operates, or the alternate NCA can operate. Technology intrusions, as I had mentioned earlier, is a problem. Why? Because technology, you guys are technologists, you are technocrats, you understand the rapid changes that are occurring in technology and how they could actually be brought into your weapons to make it a more efficient weapon. At the same time, making it efficient gives the other person very little time to respond or time to receive a signal and say, hold on, let's get to the table or something like that. And therefore, by bringing in technology intrusions into the arsenal, most countries are left with no other option but to make things more transparent. I was mentioning just before this address, gone are the days where you had to wheelbarrow the warhead and mate it with a pair of wrenches and so on and so forth. Today, the whole mating process in a canisterized weapon is electronic. The mating process on board a submarine is electronic. You're all aware of this. And therefore, if these are the kinds of technologies that have come in, then it's most important to tell people, tell potential adversaries that, look, this is the situation. So therefore, the state of readiness can be brought up from a very low level to a high level very quickly. You're not going to pass through various, 1 day of this, 3 days of that, and so on and so forth. You can very quickly transit, and therefore be extremely cautious about taking steps towards using nuclear weapons. Because remember, the main idea is not to use it. And of course, the substance of it was operationalizing. I had mentioned, I'd given the example of the short-range Prithvi missiles, ideal candidates to be, retired very quickly, because their locations, their, Google Maps and Google Earth can today tell you exactly where all your land vectors are located. If they're located close to the, tactical battle area, you must be crazy. You must be crazy to locate them because of the kind of ranges that they have, and therefore their removal is on the cards. Short-range weapons. I mentioned earlier, separation of control from custodian, nuclear for conventional, and redundancy of control have been essential to the entire doctrine. Remember, the form is explained. The doctrine is a book. It's called the Red Book. The doctrine is a book in the first few pages of the doctrine, while the second part, the substance, contains the bulk of the doctrine. The main text, the meat of the doctrine is here. How are you going to achieve no first use? How do you believe and why do you believe that your weapons are credible? What is this minimal numbers that you're talking about? And is there any logic that you've been working on to arrive at this minimal levels? And then, of course, the philosophical goals can remain the philosophical goals. Next. At this stage, I'd just like to pause for a minute. Because while all this was happening on the subcontinent, there was a proliferatory impulse that had started in the mid-70s which is spearheaded by China. While India has no problems with their declared policy of no first use, what worries us is a state policy that encourages and enables proliferation. After all, I mean, you've got to be kidding that A.Q. Khan's network was a private enterprise? This is crazy. How does a guy go across to North Korea, get a Nodong missile in an Air Force aircraft, brings it to Pakistan? Or how does Benazir Bhutto come back with 50 kilograms of plutonium? What is this? These are not gifts that countries give each other. And how does it happen without the blueprint of Pakistan's nuclear weapon having been tried and tested in China? The Nasser itself, as you know, is an artillery rocket, the C-110 or something like that, which China is rolling out. And how is it, most importantly, that Khushab 2, 3, and 4, which are experimental reactors, have an output of about 50 to 70 megawatts, made only, erected only for the production of weapon grade plutonium. How come all this has happened over a period of 10 years? We're talking about a country where A.Q. Khan himself said could not make a cycle chain. Are we saying that technology is so rapidly moved in Pakistan that they can get 4 reactors online within a period of a decade? Well, even America can't do that. And therefore, there is no getting away from the fact that the Khushab 1 has come from China, that is well known. 2, 3, 4 have also come from China. And this is the extent of proliferation that has occurred. Now, while one may argue that China's orientation all the while was to create a balance of power on the subcontinent, this might have worked. The balance of power may have worked because we had a general, a very, you may consider it an oxymoron to say a general with brains, but we had a guy called Sundarji who was quite a brainy intellectual who wrote a book called The Blind Men of Hindustan. And he talked of nuclear policies at a time when we hadn't become a weapon state. We had not overtly exploded our first weapon and claimed it to be a weapon. You know what he said? He says, declare a policy of no first use. I assure you that Pakistan will follow suit. Well, probably proves the point that the general didn't have too many brains. But that was the thinking, that this balance of power would be achieved if we had a situation where both countries followed a no first use policy. And one of our leading thinkers, jokes aside, he was a bit of a thinker. He was well ahead of his times. He was one of the few generals who had influence on the NCA then. The NCA then was Rajiv Gandhi. So, coming back to China's orientation, one was there could have been a balance of power logic. But as far as North Korea is concerned, it seems to have worked. That orientation was to fan insecurities in the Pacific Rim. You saw what happened towards the last few years of the first decade of this century. The kind of insecurities that was brought about by North Korean nuclear program, the fact of it testing rockets fired over Japan and so on and so forth. These are things that were worrisome. It must have got planners, US planners, thinking very closely because the allies were now shaky. While that orientation may have worked, the ramifications or the larger ramifications of proliferation in the Islamic world is of questionable motivation. In the Islamic world today, there has been no ambiguous statements about where their ambitions lie in the acquisition of. I'm talking about the bad guys, I'm talking about the jihadists, I'm talking about the Islamic Khilafat, I'm talking about the bad guys who are our neighbors in Pakistan. They have said very clearly, our targets are three: America, Israel, and India. Now, that being the case, we are actually looking at a situation where there's a declared intention to acquire weapons, nuclear weapons, and use them. Now, if you have a state that really believes that they can get into bed with jihadists and run foreign policy, you can see how it's happening, how it's going to happen, how things could pan out. And therefore, in the Islamic world, the fallout of a proliferatory policy by China is different. Why on earth? China and all are people who plan years ahead. I understand when Deng was asked as to what his views were on the French Revolution, he was of course talking about the Bonapartist Revolution, so on and so forth. He says, it's a little early to tell. From the late 18th century, it's a little early to tell what are the larger ramifications of the French Revolution. These are people who plan, who put their leadership through history classes to say, why did empires grow and why did they collapse? These kind of people do not make or take steps without a long-term perspective. And what that perspective could be is everybody starts talking about China. It's just a suggestion. It gives them a heft up the power ladder. Right. The next slide is absolutely central to my presentation. I would request you to observe it very carefully. Because when we talk about durable deterrence, we actually mean something like this. I picked up this little comic issue of Hagar and this exchange between his wife Helga and Hagar as he heads for the local pub to make sure it stays friendly, which really is the essence of a durable deterrence, which, however simplistic this may look at, this is the central concept of deterrence. So let's get on with what we understand by durable deterrence as to mean. I had mentioned earlier that the idea of deterrence makes the roles reversible. That itself brings about a certain amount of stability. Because the roles are reversible and because it's understood that the roles are reversible. Logic, of course, is fairly clear. Intolerable destruction would be mutual. The basis is that the deterrent itself must be stable. You must have proper command and control. You must have an NCA. You must have a division between who the custodian is and who the controller is. Despite all that, remember just the other here, you had a nuclear weapon flying right across this continent, and nobody was really in control. We are talking about a very mature nuclear weapon state that actually saw this happen. Of course, during the early years of the Cold War, one actually knows as to how close or how far one was from reaching the nuclear trigger, which was one of the reasons why in 95, I think, was the presidential nuclear initiative, which pulled back all the tactical nuclear weapons from the European front, both Russia and the United States. And these are issues that have to be understood, that the stability of the deterrent cannot be set aside because of some young maverick or hothead who decided to do a Dr. Strangelove or something like that. It cannot occur because of that. And that, we believe, was important, and that we believe could only be achieved if there was clear differentiation between the weapon, its controller, its custodian, and so on and so forth. Stability in a crisis. If a crisis occurs, there must be mechanics or mechanisms that ensure that the impulse to reach for the nuclear trigger is moderated. You cannot go there as yet. You're not in a position to go there. There are other means of resolving the difference. transparency of technology intrusions. I had mentioned this earlier. It's an extremely important fact because, as I had mentioned, this is the temple of technology, nuclear technologies, and you do understand what can be done, whether it was a neutron weapon, which I think was somewhere here. It was enabled, the neutron weapon, and things like that. Okay. But unfortunately, in the subcontinent, I made a brief mention of China and its proliferatory roles. There is an unhinged tripolar relationship, and this I'd be the first to admit. Why? Because proliferation continues. Nuclear and missile technologies are proliferating left, right, and center in the subcontinent, particularly from China to either from China to North Korea to Pakistan, but this is happening. It's a fact of life. I'm telling you that reactors are coming from there, and experimental reactors which have no other purpose than to enhance plutonium production. Pakistan's nuclear weapon program, a collusive blueprint, I mentioned this earlier, designed, tested, and sustained by Vijay. This is a fact. And this we believe to be a fact. We also believe that there exists enough empirical evidence to suggest that there are doctrinal correlations between the Sino-Pak nuclear policies. I told you at one stage, as far as China's declared policy is concerned, we don't seem to have too much problem with that. It's a no first use, and with a no first use, you can always talk. Before you reach for the trigger, you will talk. It's a no first use policy. But there is a Janus-faced approach to it all. That on the one hand, I keep the nuclear cauldron on the boil by providing Pakistan with the wherewithal and giving them a first use capability. Does it appeal to anybody other than Israel to actually put a nuclear weapon on a conventional submarine? That's what Pakistan is headed towards. I mean, this is crazy. A small cruise missile will now carry, let's say, a 10, 15, 20 kiloton weapon and will be put on a Agosta class. Why? Because it's got air-independent breathing capability. This is crazy. We all know how air-independent AIP actually is, and how limited a conventional submarine is, how prone to detection it is. And yet, you go about making attempts to mount it out there. It's a little worrisome from our point of view. Now, you may argue that but nuclear weapons are put on aircrafts. You do know that the entire, in evolving a triad of capabilities, aircrafts are the first to be chosen. Why? Because they're the easiest to strap on an iron bomb, only put a nuclear warhead. But even that must plateau. Why? Because aircrafts are very vulnerable. Airfields are vulnerable. The fact that one aircraft, one mission would have to have at least 10 escorts, I do know this by not just as a theoretical statement, but in some exercises that I had conducted where you had one mission, it had to be escorted by 10 aircraft. So what happens to your conventional force? At least in our cases, if your frontline aircrafts are going to do nothing else but escort nuclear missions, then your force levels for the conventional battle has gone very, very low, because we're talking about very capable aircraft, including air-to-air refueling, if you want an offset approach, and so on and so forth. So therefore, the build-up of a triad of weapons looks at the air vector first, but the numbers will plateau at some stage. And that stage comes very quickly because of the number of escorts, etc., that are required. Next, we go to the land vector, that is the land-based missile. The larger the continent, the larger space that you have, geographic space that you have, the more likelihood of going in this direction. But then comes Google Maps. I mean, you keep studying Google Maps, you're going to very quickly find out locations, if not in 1 year, in 5 years' time. Therefore, the vulnerability of the land vector increases with time. You're left with, for a no first use nation, you're left with no other option but to go the submarine route. That's a route that India's taken. We have taken this route for a variety of reasons to maintain credibility and to maintain stability of that deterrence. It's come at a phenomenal price. It's not a cheap thing. You guys know best as to what it takes to build an SSBN. You know the amount of testing and trying that has to be done before you actually prove it. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. So I'd mentioned that China's Janus-based policies, NFU, while fostering nuclear policy. And this is worrisome. And we look forward to methods by which China can be restrained in this particular area. Some may say that they've already been restrained. Well, time will tell. So, in trying to understand Pakistan and to make things, ideas work which are common to adversarial nations in possession of nuclear weapons, we tried to talk of an understanding of their doctrine because they don't have a declared one. I had mentioned Kidwai's thresholds, which made a lot of sense, but that was revoked straight away. I talked about Aslam Beg's auto-nuclear strike, almost like a doomsday weapon. Hey, I don't care what anybody else does to my arsenal. India, you're going to get my first weapons. Pak planners have openly stated this. Nuclear weapons and non-state actors, I repeat, nuclear weapons and non-state actors are inalienable parts to military strategy. So if they are already in bed, what's the next step? What's going to happen? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you as to where this relationship can go. The last part is worrisome. Briskness of nuclear decision making, introduction of tactical nuclear weapons, and principles of conventional war being applied to nuclear weapons. This is what happens when a nuclear arsenal is placed in the army's hand. We're all groomed in that manner. Principles of war, surprise, mobility, concentration of force. These are issues that do not apply to a nuclear arsenal. Why is it not applicable? Because the destructive capability of nuclear weapons is conceded. It's passé. I give you the destructive capability. So what is it that I'm looking at now? I'm looking at intent. And that is why, where nuclear weapons are concerned, intent becomes so much more important. Unlike conventional weapons, where you say, we work on capabilities. In nuclear weapons, the capabilities are conceded. And therefore, what you work on is intent. And that intent has to be through transparency, through statements, through declaratory policy statements. And therefore, this is worrisome. The last bullet, to India at least. And now if you try and make sense of Pakistan's nuclear strategy, you are actually looking at a nuclear nightmare. And the first paradox that hits you is, hey, if this is the balance of situation, if you have a problem internally, you seem to have problems with most countries, any terrorist attack anywhere in the world is traced back to camps in Pakistan, whether it's Madrid, whether it's New York, whether it's London, it's traced back, or whether it's the Indian Parliament or Mumbai, it's traced back to you. Under these conditions, and when there's an unequal balance of economy and the military power, why not rapprochement? Why is there no rapprochement? If you ask this question, it becomes extremely clear why no rapprochement. It is because the military cannot survive without having an existential threat, whatever it may be. Create one. But for the military to hold on to its supremacy, it has to have that threat. The second aspect of making sense of Pakistan's nuclear strategy is the perilous uncertainty. China's two-phase policy, introduction of tactical nuclear weapons, and a policy to use. No nuclear weapon country has a policy to use. You first have a policy to deter, and if that deterrence breaks down, well, you use. At least you have one major step, conceptual step before you get closer to the nuclear trigger. The fact that there is a certain element of uncontrollability, because there is no division. The same person who's going to use the, should we say, AK-47 or whatever infantryman, or whatever the infantryman carries, is the same blighter who's going to use the weapon too. I have been groomed in the military for 45 years. I know that given a certain situation, I will fight to the last weapon that I hold. So where are all these thresholds and things like that comes? The moment I have tactical nuclear weapons, you'll find a company commander, an artillery company commander will use that weapon. Why? Because he says, I'm going to lose it now. Uncontrollability, convulsive and unrestrained nature of nuclear escalation. I think I mentioned this earlier. Lastly, if one were to try and articulate what the nuclear nightmare is, I'd like to put it as follows: a hair-trigger, opaque deterrent, embracing tactical use under single military control, steered by an obscure doctrine steeped in ambiguity and guided by a military strategy that carouses and finds unity with non-state actors. Well, if this is my articulation of what the nuclear nightmare is, I put it to you, it's upon India and it's upon the rest of the world. So let me conclude, because I seem to have taken my, conclude by repeating the prologue, only in slightly different terms, that India struck a covenant not just with her own citizens, but with the global community at large. At the heart of this pledge was the voluntary renunciation of the first use of nuclear weapons. To deliberately temper a sword and then to abjure its first use appears to contradict sovereign morality. And yet, if there is belief in the changed nature of warfare that nuclear weapons have wrought, that has morphed political objectives from war winning to war avoidance, and humanity's moral weight would be on the side of the covenant sans sword. Thank you very much for so patiently bearing with me. If there are any.
Thank you very much, Admiral Shankar, for that tour de force of theory and practice. Fantastic. I know a lot of you are probably pressed for time, and we've gone our 1 hour, so you are free to leave. But if you'd like to stay, I think we have a little bit of time scheduled for question and answer. So if you'd like to ask a question. Sure, yes.
What would be 100% effective defense against any nuclear use? Star Wars completely perfected. What would it do to your strategy?
Being in the service, having commanded a variety of ships, including aircraft carriers, this is utopian. You will never have a situation where you can protect yourself so well that you are totally invulnerable to a nuclear attack. Remember, the offense is always at an advantage, because they convert certain technologies for offensive purposes before you can start defending. The American ABM program over the last God knows how many years is a testimony to this failure. At which time, when you have two rational nuclear powers, the best is not to have it. Because in itself, by saying that I have put up a defensive shield and therefore I am free to do what I want to do, actually becomes bad logic for a deterrent situation. It can actually precipitate certain policy changes in the potential adversary. Not too sure that answers the question, but I'd suggest to you that can't have it. Actually, it rocks the boat.
John?
So, it seems to me that India and Pakistan are in strategically very different situations. To really cut right to the chase, India has a very large, powerful, conventional military force. and expects, I think, in any conflict, if it remained conventional, that India would prevail. I think the Pakistanis see it the same way. So is it really reasonable to expect the Pakistanis to adopt a no first use policy when they expect to be overwhelmed conventionally?
You know, in the various incidents that have occurred, wars that we have fought with Pakistan, despite our conventional superiority, we've not started even one. Other than you may argue that in the Bangladesh situation, well, if you get 10 million refugees, you do it. You do it too. You do it, and the first million came across. Other than that, we've never started any wars. India traditionally has been not an aggressive state. The days of the Mauryan Empire, the Gupta Empire, are long gone. Are long gone. Leadership like Mahatma Gandhi and all, they are essentially pacifists. You know, so therefore, we do believe that weapons that's going to annihilate the very purpose of fighting, at least that ought not to be used. And finally, I'd made that one statement. If you have such a conventional disparity and imbalance, such an economic imbalance, you better start thinking seriously about rapprochement.
One might think so, but now you have a situation, let's say hypothetically, that some war occurs for whatever reason between India and Pakistan, and some nuclear weapons Can you hear me now?
I could hear you before.
It's the same as before.
Yeah, okay. And some nuclear weapons get used, say it's by Pakistan, and let's say they're not too many kilotons. It's along the forward line of troops, and no Indian city has been hit. Then what?
I think our policy is reasonably clear here. We have said that there is no way that anybody can control the escalatory ladder. And therefore, it's best not to use it, because if you do use it, then you are inviting yourself to a massive attack. And that attack will be on your value targets. That is policy. We don't want to use it. And that's why no first use. But if one is used on an Indian under the circumstances that have been listed in the doctrine, then there would be a massive retaliation. There's nothing in between, because we never used it. That is the logic that is applied here. So don't use it. And I assure you, in the games that we played, in some of the games that we have played with the Pakistanis as the adversary, they were most reluctant to use it, understanding full well that this was a mistake. It was a whim of one man to go the tactical nuclear route. That's
I was really impressed. Does this even work?
I can hear you.
It's for the TV.
I was deeply impressed with India.
Otherwise, they can't hear you. I was deeply impressed with India achieving orbit at Mars with the surveyor. How is that technology that achieved it? Is that achieved a change in the deterrent posture or credibility? How is that affected?
Are you suggesting that is this a signal to tell the world that, listen here, we have the capability to go to Mars, and therefore the capability to come out with more sophisticated missiles and so on and so forth? If that is the point you're asking, the answer would be yes. Because technology is again, I shouldn't be telling you guys this, technology is such a beast that it can be used for a variety of purposes, the same technology. But if you notice that in the evolution of the Indian nuclear arsenal, there was not so much interaction between the peoples who were making these rockets and the peoples who were designing weapons. There wasn't. Not to say that there isn't today, there is.
Yeah. Sir, Major Tim Hall, Air Force fellow here.
At last, a fellow 4G.
I guess, sir, my question is, have you looked at extending, if China were to extend their deterrence to Pakistan, and so if Pakistan were to initiate hostilities, nuclear, and China to step in and say, hey, don't do it, don't respond with your massive retaliation, with your promise of a massive retaliation, otherwise you'll invoke our wrath. Have you looked at it from that perspective, as well as have you looked at deterring proliferance, like China providing technology with that same promise of a massive attack if Pakistan were to use their forces?
As I had mentioned, that in a deterrent relationship, there is a great element of irrationality in the idea. Because if you were to follow that logic, that if I deterred you from using it and you deterred me from using it, why the hell am I holding on to these weapons at all? I mean, that logic stands and makes sense. As far as China is concerned, they would be full aware that currently the nuclear equation is reaching a level of balance. Not just because the SSBN is coming to fruition, but also because of the ranges that some of our land-based ballistic missiles are concerned. And therefore, for them to come up and say that, oh, don't step in this direction, you're getting into a different arena, well, tell your proxy not to. After all, you provided the weapon. Pull out the plug from under them. Pull out the fuse. Do what you have to. Make sure it doesn't happen. Which is the reason why you'll find that not only is technology being brought into our arsenal, ranges are increasing, probably stabilize at 5,000 kilometers, which is where we are today. I don't believe that China would risk its position in the world for a proxy of this nature, which threatens them too. There were problems in Xinjiang.
One more? Yes, sir.
Kind of related to that, is India considered extending the threat of mass retaliation to China in the event that Pakistan strikes India?
No, hold it. Pakistan strikes India. Actually, this is the Aslam Beg logic that Pakistan strikes India, we strike China. No.
Pakistan and China.
Well, why China?
Encourage China.
Why China? We have no problems with China.
If you were considering that China had helped proliferate nuclear weapons to
Yes,
Pakistan.
but this is no answer. The nuclear weapon exchange is no answer to that. The answer to that is more diplomatic. Is more a diplomatic thrust globally to say this is now in dangerous hands. You better stop it. Stop Khushab. Stop the production of the instruments that could miniaturize the warheads.
Let's go ahead and thank Admiral Shankar for